You're listening to the Beyond Measurements and Image podcast, where we build healthier lifestyles, elevate your well-being, and transform lives. Welcome to BMI.
I'm your host, Dr. Drew Crawford. I'm a board-certified gastroenterologist and obesity medicine specialist. Thank you for joining me today on Beyond Measurements and Image. Britt, earlier today, you and I were, before we hit record, we were just talking about how the world really is designed and evolves toward everything becoming easier. You know, there's sort of the concept of entropy, where everything evolves with everything. I mean, like back even like in the agricultural revolution, right? We went from plowing fields with oxen, and then, you know, the mechanized tractor came along, and then the automobile came along, and all of progress seems to be measured by making things easier for humans and the human condition. And I think, and we're better off in a million ways than our caveman ancestors. But somewhere along the line, we've lost the grit or the tenacity or something. It's like we feel entitled for an easy life. And I think everybody, if they're honest with themselves, would recognize that the progress that you make in life is through the struggles in life. I think a great quote is, there's no growth in the comfort zone, and there's no comfort in the growth zone. That's so true. Let's just talk about that.
Absolutely, Drew. I think you hit on a great point there. Historically, our greatest leaps and strides forward as individuals and as humanity have been through difficult times and hardships. I can certainly speak to the course of our lives that the goal of life has been to pursue all things on a path to easiness, to avoid difficult situations, and to chase comfort. And certainly I will admit that we don't want our lives to become a disaster zone. We don't want to invite trouble into our life, but we have to realize that perseverance through a trial or through a hardship is often what leads to personal growth. It's often what helps develop our character. And oftentimes that descriptive term you used, our grit and our ability to withstand difficult situations. I've heard you talk about this on this podcast in particular several times. It's moved into all phases. It's kind of infected, I would say, all phases of our life, especially our life in this part of the world. We seek comfort in minimizing our physical exertion. We seek comfort in the foods we eat. We seek comfort in how we spend our leisure time. We seek comfort in making our work lives easier. We seek comfort and easiness in virtually all phases of our life. And you may say, well, that's normal, that's human nature, and that may have become our nature, but that certainly wasn't how I believe we were designed to exist. I don't think we were ultimately put here for the aggressive pursuit of comfort. We were designed and have evolved and have developed into seeking that, but it certainly would behoove us, I think, to acknowledge that many of our episodes or seasons of life that have represented personal growth and development have come through enduring difficult things and persevering through hardships.
Yeah, that's so true. In all phases, whether it's, academics, thinking back to like when you're in school, if a topic comes easy to you, I don't know, chances are maybe you're not that interested in it, or, I don't know if that's true, but to me, it just seems like the things that are the most challenging, and maybe it just depends on your mindset, but if you're not really wired for math, but you study hard and you put in time and you sort of rise to the occasion and overcome and pass that test, or, whatever in the academic world, that just seems to kind of set the precedence for how that will be. Definitely in athletics. You were a collegiate tennis player.
Correct.
So if you had an opponent that you've beaten many times and you really weren't worried about, your preparation for him or her didn't take you to the next level of your athleticism in that sport, right? But if you had an opponent that maybe you had never beat, or that you really wanted to beat, or it was maybe just a little out of your reach, that discomfort, right? That uneasiness would set you on a path of training and discipline to get you closer. So it's like the struggle of having that opponent on your schedule and your ability to improve yourself to get past him, that's what makes you better. So if you have multiple opponents on your schedule for a season, at the end of the season, into that season, you're probably going to be much improved because the struggle is what honed the skill. But if you have kind of a schmuck schedule and you don't really have to practice that much to get better to beat these guys, you beat them, maybe your record's the same at the end of the season. Maybe your record's even better at the end of the season by taking the easy road, but you're not better.
Absolutely. And I think that's true in athletics. And I think that's true in our personal lives and our professional lives. Oftentimes that road less traveled is the more difficult one, but it's oftentimes what we remember most favorably, what we describe historically as our best season in life, and is those things that we had to struggle and had to fight for. I found that over the course of my life, I've had seasons that were filled with struggle, our medical school training, our residency training, all of those things were challenging seasons, representing long hours of hard work and preparation and late nights and sleepless nights and early mornings. And all of those things are true. And then sometimes we fall into this trap of when that season ends, that we expect some kind of reward from life for the rest of life to be easy or things to be easy. And it's very easy to feel that you deserve like a reward for enduring that season. And sometimes the reward is just the fact that you made it through. Life doesn't really owe you anything, but sometimes we get put on a path that we think that we deserve things to be easy now or comfortable now. And it's very easy to kind of drop out and stop doing difficult. There's that commercial a few years ago where they pressed the easy button when something difficult came up. And I think it's very representative of a lot of folks in our generation and generations that are following us, that we can opt out sometimes and stop doing difficult and start looking to press that easy button. That easy button can be manifest in a number of ways. It can be manifest in apathy or laziness. It can be manifest in the diet we eat or the alcohol that we drink or the drugs we use or whatever releases us from that responsibility of doing the difficult things that are just part of life. They're going to come. Some of us are going to get it worse than others, but it's how we endure that and how we persevere that determines the people that we become.
Yeah. Yeah, that's well said. You were talking earlier about Fernando from a previous podcast and how much you admired all the difficulties that man's gone through. I think you said it best. I mean, there's really not an obstacle out there that wasn't thrown in Fernando's way. And there wasn't an obstacle out there that Fernando hasn't conquered, right? And unfortunately, Fernando's a young man, and there's going to be more obstacles. But I got complete faith in him.
Absolutely. I mean, I don't even know that young man. I know him only through listening to this podcast, and I can tell you that's a remarkable story.
Yeah.
And he could have stopped doing difficult and started pushing the easy button, so to speak, on a number of occasions, and rightfully so. I mean, he had a lot of things handed to him. And some of them weren't his fault. Some of them weren't problems that he created with bad decisions. Now, some of them may have been, but he never let his circumstances distract him from continuing to strive for a better life, better health, a better education. I was overwhelmed. I've listened to that particular episode probably 3 times because I draw inspiration from it. I draw inspiration from his story because it's an unbelievable story when you think of the difficulties that he's had to encounter in life and how he's dealt with them. There was something very human about how he described that. He was very honest, a little emotion, but there was no self-pity. There was just continuing to strive for a better life, which is, what we're all trying to do.
Right. Just grit.
Grit is a great term.
Yeah. And he didn't let his circumstances determine his outcome.
No.
Right. I mean, he had an outcome pre-programmed in his brain, and he's there.
Yeah.
It's interesting. You watch, I don't know anything about the bodybuilding world, but for those of you that don't remember Fernando's story, you need to go back and listen to it. But ultimately, by the time I got around to knowing Fernando, he was an obese internal medicine resident who set himself on a path to lose weight. And by the time he started his fellowship, he had lost, I believe, 140 pounds. That's a huge success story. prior to me meeting him, he'd overcome multiple other bigger obstacles. And he sits here in this podcast room and tells a story with a smile on his face and is just proud of what he did. No victim mentality. But now, having gone from an obese resident to a slim fellow, super well-trained physician, he's into bodybuilding. And I don't know. I mean, he's probably too old for Mr. Olympia. Yeah. I should, I'm sure he's told me, but I don't know what the contests are that he's going to enter. But he'll succeed at them. He'll do fantastic. And it's interesting because that's another example of stress that makes you better. If you lay in bed, it is 1,000 times more comfortable. Or you sit on the couch or you sit at a desk or whatever, right? You have whatever sedentary lifestyle you have. It's comfortable, but you don't grow muscles. You don't get stronger. But when you're in the gym, like Fernando is, lifting heavy weights and grueling and managing his time, but with those weights, he's tearing muscle. It's uncomfortable. But then as that muscle heals, it gets bigger and it hypertrophies and he gains strength. And the discipline of doing that day in and day out is uncomfortable, but there's growth in it. If we choose the easy route, in the end, it's harder. And you watch, that young man's going to be Mr. Olympia, Mr. Olympia Senior. I don't know. He's going to be the next Arnold.
Yeah. His story is one of success and just one of not only physical success or athletic ability or athletic training, but just a triumph of will and the human spirit, where being dealt circumstances early in life that really would have caused a lot of people and may have caused somebody like myself to identify as a victim. And he chose not to. At every step of the way when it was difficult, he chose not to be a victim. He chose to look for a path forward. Like I said, I don't even know the young man, but I draw inspiration from his story. You know him personally and professionally, and you speak highly of him, but I would speak highly of him just hearing the story on the podcast. If there's one episode of your podcast that I would recommend to people, it's that one. That's the one. That's the story. Yeah, absolutely.
It's interesting. I think one of the things that people do, which you were sort of talking about, they get through whatever obstacle they have, and then they think, okay, well, now it's time to relax. So use the example of medical school or college. Maybe you go to college to get into medical school, then you're in medical school, so you think I can take my foot off the gas. And you don't. You can't, right? But then you get through medical school then, and same thing. You think maybe you can take your foot off the gas. Well, then you got residency. But then when you finish residency or fellowship, maybe you can a little bit at that point. I think it's important, and you and I can relate to the medical education component of it, but no matter what your profession is, but I think it's super important that people have ongoing goals throughout their life. If you don't have a purpose, it's hard to have a plan. Without a purpose, you can't have a plan. Without a plan and a goal and a pattern, you need something. So I can remember early on when I started college, I wanted to go work at the fire department. So I sort of set a goal of getting a job as a firefighter. And then I got that job. And then I wanted to, sort of climb the ranks. And so I went to EMT school, then paramedic school. And then at some point I decided I wanted to get into medical school. And so there's just these sort of ongoing goals. So then I wanted to be a doctor and this and that. But then once you get out, you need to continue to have goals, whether it's medicine or if you're in marketing or welding school. It doesn't matter what line of work you're in. If your professional goals have been met, then it's time to have other goals. For me, a lot of that was focused around running and biking and things like that. That's never ending. That's a slippery slope, because then you run a race and then you think I can run a longer race, or you can run that race faster, But again, maybe not the worst thing. But just having constant goals ahead of yourself and not letting yourself get sedentary and taking your foot off the gas. When you have those little goals, you just have to have the discipline to follow through and to set up a plan. But I know every time you're here, I see you up early in the morning journaling. I think that's what you're doing.
Mm-hmm.
Tell me about that. I'm guessing, and I don't know what it's like to journal. I don't even know what you're journaling, but I'm guessing that when you do that, you're sort of rehashing some of the struggles and successes that you've had so that you can continue to learn from those and build on them. I don't know. Is that a fair assessment? Does that help you when you do that? And it looks like an everyday process from what I see.
It is. It's part of my recovery process. It's a persistent goal setting process. One of the things where I kind of fell off track, so to speak, was after all of my residency training, I had all these goals and I fulfilled all these goals. And then I went into practice and I didn't really have any clearly defined goals. And goals around money or resources tend to not be overtly motivating for me. I didn't have any goals beyond that. And so when life got difficult, I started to have some medical issues and some issues centered around my health. I had started pushing the easy button, and I didn't really have any drive to pursue what the problem was, what the medical issue that I was dealing with, to pursue not only what it was, but what the solution to that problem might be. So we fast forward a few years. I'm approaching 3 years of sobriety now. Journaling, you mentioned, it's a big part of my daily process. I get up early. I read scripture. I spend time in prayer and meditation, and I write about those things. I write down prayers. Sometimes I write down Bible verses. Sometimes I write down gratitude lists. I make lists of things that I'm grateful for on a daily basis. I do a Bible study. I make prayer lists of people that I think about and pray for on a daily basis. And what those things do for me is they get me out of self. They get me into thinking about others before I think about myself. For years and years in my professional life and in addiction, I was completely, for lack of a better term, I was a selfish, self-centered person, and I didn't think of others before myself. And so now I live a very intentional life in that I try to think of others first. And part of that process is on a daily basis, I get up and journal, and some days I'll spend 30, 45 minutes doing that. But some days I'll spend 3 or 4 hours doing it. My schedule allows me to do that at times. I'm grateful for that. And that happens really irregardless of where I'm at. So if I'm at home, that's where it happens most of the time. But when I come visit you and your family and I stay here at your home, I find a place in the morning to do that. It's usually early in the morning, but it's part of that process. Even if I'm just setting out goals or plans for the day, it helps me live in the moment, put others first, and then set out to accomplish that day what I feel like I need to accomplish.
That's nice. That's a good way to start the day. When you have sort of constant goals that you're setting like that, or micro goals that ultimately make the totality of your life, the concept of completing one and then being able to rest, the fact that there's no finish line in life is so key. I guess the ultimate finish line, we'll all hit that. But as long as we're alive, there shouldn't be a finish line. Because if there is, maybe you haven't died, but you've quit living. On this podcast, we talk about health and wellness and all these different things, but sometimes just having a purpose and just having the ability to identify something that you want to do for yourself to make yourself better. And maybe it's not for you. Maybe it's to make your family better or whatever, but having a purpose. And then when you reach it, just move on to the next goal. And it sounds like that's what you do in the morning. It sounds like that's just kind of Britt Morris's daily life now.
It is. And my life is fairly simple now, but I relish that. I'm grateful for that. It's slower paced. If I take time to do those things in the morning, it sets my day up for success. And success may not mean making a lot of money. It may not mean doing anything extraordinary. It may just be being a better friend, being a better neighbor, being a better father, and trying to grow in my faith and grow in my walk. I like how you put that. Those are the micro goals that I set out. And one that you touched on as well that I have to be cognizant of because I failed at it in the past is I can't quit. I'm grateful when I reach a goal that I set or when I have something that I accomplish. Life doesn't owe you anything just because you've had a success, And so I've got to continue moving forward and continue setting new goals or continue to live the life that I've marked out. And if the mistake I made in the past was that once I crossed through a very difficult, challenging season, to be honest, I felt like I deserved or life owed me something easy from then on. And that's just not the way the world works. I had to learn that the hard way, and it took me a lot of years to learn it. But I know it now. My eyes are open, and I intend on keeping them open. Those habits that we set forth, I get up early. I go through my morning rituals, so to speak. They're a huge part of my life. And personally, I feel like they set my day up for success.
Mm-hmm. You and I have talked. You know how much I love to listen to David Goggins. And he's insane. And I totally get it. But to me, he's the embodiment of all this stuff. But have you ever heard him talk about, I think he describes it as his biggest fear. He talks about his biggest fear is that when he dies, he goes to heaven and he gets before God. And God has a book and he pulls it out. Let's just say, it's about you. So he has a book and it says Britt Morris on it. And so he pulls the book of Britt Morris and says, well, tell me what you did with your life.
And so Goggins is telling, he says, my biggest fear is that I'm going to miss what I was supposed to do. So he said, he was like 297 pounds. He always talks about, 297 pounds spraying for cockroaches wasn't smart, this, that, and the other. These are his words, not mine.
Mm-hmm.
But now he's, an ultra marathoner, Ironman, was a Navy SEALs, Army Ranger, was just incredible, but not terribly balanced, But he said, when I get to heaven, he said, I would hate to have showed up there as a 300-pound cockroach sprayer, and God pulls the book and says, I had you down for a Navy SEAL. I pre-programmed you to go to Ranger School. You were going to be an ultra marathoner, and you missed the mark. He doesn't talk about, or at least, my understanding is he didn't talk about worried about going to hell or some eternity like that. Maybe he does. I'm not speaking for his beliefs, but he just wants to make sure that he maximizes everything he can do on this earth. And he actually references, I believe, I think he has a book even says something about there's no finish line or something to that, because that guy clearly just finds a goal and then just executes it. I'd be lying if I didn't say, I've told you I'm trying to qualify and get into Boston this year. So I'm out there doing these runs that are completely uncomfortable, hill repeats 2 or 3 times the past couple of weeks, And when I'm grinding up that hill and I'm short of breath and my legs are getting tired, I can just hear him chirping in my ear, It is so motivating. He has been in the worst shape in the world and now he's in the best shape in the world. It's awesome to hear somebody, the other day, my coach had I have like an online coach, right? And so it's just like an internet thing. But it was like hill repeats 8 to 10. You go do a 25-minute warm up, and then you do these hill repeats. And it was like 2.5 minutes uphill as fast as you can, and then you come down in 3 minutes. And you do that 8 to 10 times. I was on like the 6th one, and I was like, well, I only have 2 more if I just do 8. 4 more if you do 10. You're kind of talking with yourself.
Negotiating.
I was kind of like, well, let me see how the 7th one feels, and I'll decide. And then I'm like, no, you need to decide right now. It was windy as fuck. I was just like, this is an 8 kind of day. Although I'm not really, my kids will tell you, if it's 8 to 10, then it's 10. I can remember I was running up the hill and I was out of breath. I was so uncomfortable. And I remember thinking, I'm so tired. It needs to be 8 today. And I could hear Goggins in my ear saying, don't finish when you're tired. You finish when you're done.
That's good. That's good.
Motherfucker, if I didn't run 10 of those bastards. And 8, 9, and 10 were the best. Yeah. They're the best ones, right? Everything's a mindset, right? And circling back to where we were, we're programmed to just make it easy.
Yeah.
Whatever's easy, that's the road to take. It's like water. It's always the path of least resistance. But I don't know. That doesn't make you better.
No, I can certainly put myself in those shoes. Drew, 3 years ago, I had my right leg amputated. And when I got back home, I was trying to be sober. I was trying to recover, trying to heal from this amputation. But I live alone. And I'd spent the last decade, maybe decade and a half doing easy, just constantly hitting that easy button and not doing difficult things. And so my body was weak. I'm 6'5". I weighed about 175 pounds, no muscle mass because I'd been sitting around drinking and doing drugs for many years. All of a sudden, I'm in my house by myself in a wheelchair. I don't have a prosthetic yet, so I can't really get around except in the wheelchair. And so I start listening to different motivational speakers because I'm trying to find something to motivate me to get up and live. And so I settled on these motivational speakers, which are really motivational sermons. And I can remember this mantra. I'd get up early in the morning and listen to it as I made coffee or tried to make breakfast or rolling around my house in this wheelchair. And it would say, it kept saying, you've got to find comfort in being uncomfortable. I didn't know I had been chasing comfort for so long. I didn't really know how to sit with being uncomfortable and deal with that. I'm not saying I have it figured out, and I'm not saying I have it perfect today, but I know what that means. At the time, it sounded cool coming out of the radio, coming out of my headphones or whatever way I was listening to it at the time. It was motivating, but I didn't really know what it meant. I didn't know what I had to do to chase that. And today, I don't get it perfect every day, but I certainly understand what it's like to have discomfort and be comfortable being uncomfortable at times, being comfortable being a little bit hungry sometimes. Food is another one of those areas where we've talked about this on previous podcasts, that it's sometimes a mechanism that we use to chase comfort, to pacify us where we're constantly feeding ourselves or constantly chasing something that would produce dopamine to give us some relief or some pleasure.
Mm-hmm.
So we can make anything in our world a weapon that works against us. And certainly with our previous discussion about the new dietary guidelines, I think that's a trap that not everybody in America, but a large portion of Americans have fallen into with regard to their relationship with food, using that as a source of comfort.
Yeah, 100%, which is so much a reason for this podcast.
Yeah.
It's interesting, one of the things I think, and I don't know, you tell me if I'm wrong, but I think one of the things about recovery, and I don't know if it's part of the 12-step program or I don't know how it fits in, but I think a component of that is just the self-recognition of a problem. And you can elaborate on that more, but to me, talk about being uncomfortable. I think most people are uncomfortable enough with themselves that they don't really sit with themselves in any sort of silence. And I don't necessarily mean literal silence, but just in your mind. Just silence your mind and just say, this is where you're weak. Yeah, kudos to you for this, that, and that. But this is your problem. Or maybe not your problem, but this is where you need improvement. And so if you have that sort of self-reflection and accountability to be uncomfortable with your flaws, and we've all got a million of them, some of us more than others, then you see that weakness, and then hopefully you can do something to make it better. No doubt, identifying the weakness is uncomfortable, but what's even more uncomfortable is the process of turning that into a strength,
Absolutely.
which I think the program that you reference all the time is, but that process is what makes you stronger, right? I mean, the man that sits before me here today in this podcast is the strongest Britt Morris that I've ever seen. Now, granted, I didn't see you much during those really dark times, but the guy that I knew before that was incredibly strong. Medical student, resident. I mean, so much admiration for that man. A testament to you. You found a hard way to be uncomfortable, but you ground through it. And now you're so much of a stronger person, in my estimation, for having gone through that. And I know you would choose a million times never to go through that, but we don't get that option. So I think the self-reflection, recognizing what our problem is, and not all of them, right? Maybe just sit down and identify one problem. And maybe it's work ethic. Maybe it's substance abuse. Maybe it's a poor relationship. Maybe it's eating, whatever, being uncomfortable enough with yourself. And it's amazing how little self-reflection I think people have.
Drew, that's it. I mean, and that's part of what I do in the morning. Part of that I mentioned is meditating. Sometimes I'll just let my mind go and think about things in my life, things that I want to do with my life, or things about my past life. I don't let it hold me hostage, but that self-reflection, introspection, recognizing and identifying and admitting that you have a problem. Like you said, whatever that problem may be, then you can start, as you touched on earlier in this discussion, start identifying some goals, start identifying some ways to turn that into a strength, to turn that weakness that is a weakness. Maybe others know it's your weakness as well. Maybe they don't, but you know it. If you're being honest with yourself, you know that your weakness is, for example, I need to get up early. And so you become intentional about setting that habit, and setting that tone, not only getting up in the morning at an earlier hour, whatever goal you determine that to be, then you start setting out goals. What are you going to do with that extra time? So if you're getting up an hour before you normally do, what are you going to do with that 60 minutes? That's the gift that you're giving yourself for growth, is that time. But you don't get that without identifying what the weakness is, as you put it, what the problem is. And once you identify that, then you start setting goals about how to fix it. And once you figure out a process by which you work through your problems, your character flaws, your weaknesses, however you want to phrase that, once you identify that and identify a way to work through those, it's a little bit like a superpower where you can just start knocking those things off. I'm not saying it's easy, but it can be simple. It may require work. It may be a grind, but then you're starting to identify a path forward. And that is a big part of that process.
Yeah. One thing that I've mentioned in other episodes of this, but it's definitely a string that has weaved its way through everything, whether it's addiction, weight loss, the stuff that Huffy's gone through. I mean, the one thing that is consistent, or maybe I should say the two things that are consistent, is one, the intentionality you have to solve a problem. or fulfill a goal. You have to have intentionality and consistency. Those two things alone and nothing more. I'm like you, I consume all these podcasts and I love to listen to Jocko, right? And he has a book called Discipline is Freedom. I don't know if you've read it, but it's a great book. I mean, to be honest with you, everything you need to know you get from the title.
That's a good way to put it.
It is. I mean, it's, it's a big, thick book. It's fine. And he did a fine job of writing it, but you read the title and you got it. Because by having that discipline to do whatever, in the end, it allows you the freedom to have the autonomy over your life because of the disciplined life that you live. And you've seen it and probably lived it, right? When you don't have that disciplined life, things get out of control and you completely lose control. Not to say that if you're super disciplined that things may not go your way, but at least you're captain of the ship. And if the ship's going off course, at least your discipline, your intentionality, and your consistency and willingness to show up and right the ship gives you the best opportunity to be in control of that.
100%. It's funny you brought up Jocko. I've listened to his podcast a few times, but it's not something I consume regularly. But it is an interesting coincidence you bring his name up because 3 years ago, I didn't even really know what a podcast was. And a friend of mine knew I was struggling. I was early in recovery. I was in the process of getting a prosthetic for my amputation. One of the things I was struggling with was sleep. I couldn't sleep, and I'd struggled with it for years. I was undisciplined in any type of sleep habit. I didn't even know what a sleep habit was. But a friend of mine forwarded me a podcast and had to tell me how to listen to it. I didn't even really know how that worked. And it was Jocko's podcast. It was like a 3-hour podcast. He had a guy on there who was an expert in discussing sleep habits.
Yeah, I've heard it.
Yeah.
I think he's like an ex-military guy.
He was.
Turned physician.
Yes.
Yeah.
I mean, my friend had struggled with sleep and had used this and thought it would be helpful to me. And so I listened to it, and that was the first goal and habit in my journey of recovery, outside of abstinence. That was one of the first things I started to do that didn't involve hitting an easy button, didn't involve taking a sleeping pill or drinking something to make me go to sleep. It didn't involve smoking something to make me go to sleep. It didn't involve something that I would have considered an easy fix. It was set up a habit around your sleep. I didn't even know you could do that until I heard this gentleman's podcast. And that's where it started for me. So it's interesting that here I sit 3 years later recording these podcasts with you. And 3 years ago, not even quite 3 years ago, really, I didn't even know what that was. Jocko, who you referenced, it was his podcast that started this journey for me. And it was around the habit of learning to sleep.
Right.
Yeah.
Which probably started with some intention to get better at sleep.
Absolutely.
And some consistency with implementing those recommendations.
Absolutely. And these are habits that I still follow to this day. And I don't even know if I need to continue to follow them, but I'm almost afraid not to follow them because they work for me and I sleep like a baby now.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. I always enjoy the podcast. They're long. They're 3 hours long, but I always enjoy what he has to say. And it's funny, we've kind of been all over the map a little bit, but in the end, just the idea of having self-reflection, seeing where we can improve, having intention to improve it, and setting micro goals, and then being consistent with achieving those, I think summarizes really what's important. And recognizing that when it's hard, it's better. The other day, I was actually talking about that run where it was so windy and it was uphill. And one of the ladies I work with said, well, did you think about quitting? And I was like, no, but I was like, the great thing was nobody else was out running. And I said, that made me feel stronger because normally there's a bunch of people out running. But then on a day like that where it's uncomfortable, they're not running. So when you're running, you're getting stronger and they're not. And then she said, well, is there any time you won't run? And I said, I don't really run in ice or lightning. How about like a day in the winter when it's 14 degrees and the wind's blowing and a wind chill of 3 or, whatever. She said, will you run in that? I said, definitely. I'll definitely run in that. And she said, isn't it miserable? I said, no. You know what I think about? I think about that day in August when it was 100 and I was sweating my balls off and all I wanted was some fucking cold air. And so it feels good. And she said, and in August, you probably think about this day. I said, that's exactly right. And so it's just a matter of mindset. You can take a shitty day where it's freezing cold and you've got to run. And if you run it and you just have some gratitude, boy, I'm glad it's cold because I can remember 6 months ago, it was so incredibly hot. And then you just flip that back. Our mind messes with us. Our mind gives up way before our body does on physical challenges. And you just have to override that mind. I've been convinced that I'm having a heart attack. I've been convinced that, I've got some kind of cancer. I'm not even going to make it back to the house before I die. Your mind plays tricks on you. And it's primal. It's self-preserving. If our mind didn't do that, we'd be out there just doing stupid shit until the time we died. But recognizing, at least on these physical challenges, that our mind quits way before our body. And we just have to figure out a way to override our mind. And that's not easy to do, right? Because our mind, as Goggins says, our mind always has a tactical advantage on us. It knows everything about us. And that's right. But when you know that, then you can override it.
And that's well said, Drew. Our minds are, the way we interpret the world. From a biblical perspective, it tells us to take our thoughts captive, to learn to manage those things. We were made to endure and do difficult things. And sometimes we just get into this comfort mindset where we want to quit after we're scheduled to run 10 hill repeats and we want to quit after 8 because we're seeking comfort. We're seeking relief. I think part of that process is, for me, comes through managing my thoughts and managing where I let my mind take me. There's a quote, I've consumed some of his social media content. A guy named Gary Brecka describes himself as a human biologist, and he has some interesting content and some stuff that I like. Not everything, but I liked a lot of his stuff. He had this quote, and I remembered it because it's kind of catchy. I don't know if it's his quote, but he's who I heard it from, and he describes aging as the aggressive pursuit of comfort.
I like that.
And I really like that. He also describes sitting as the new smoking.
Yeah.
So those things, much like you, when I'm in the middle of some type of something difficult, especially something physically difficult, those are the things that run through my head. You often can't control the thoughts that pop into your head, good, bad, or indifferent. I do think that we have some control over what we let stay in our head and how we let that affect our emotions and our human performance.
Talking about just being soft versus taking the tough way. There's an author, his last name is Hopf. I believe it's Hopf. I think he was a Marine. He's an author. And he has a quote. He says, "Hard times create strong men. Strong men create good times. Good times create weak men. And weak men create hard times." And I love that quote because it's so true and it's cyclical. And that's true of society, but that's true on an individual level as well. When things are good, we get soft, and then basically we deteriorate until we have to get strong. And the trick is, again, consistency, self-reflection, constantly look in that personal mirror. Look and see where your weaknesses are. Not to belittle yourself or degrade yourself, but simply to continue to build yourself. It seems like we just always need to be on a path of self-improvement. And when we're not on that path, then we're just not really living. We're not maximizing. And I love Goggins' thought of showing up to heaven and just saying, "Crawford, I saw you qualifying for Boston in 26, but you did 8. You did 8 hill repeats. You should have done 10. I sent my angel, Goggins, to sit on your shoulder, and you didn't listen to him."
That's good.
I think this has been a great conversation and just a lot of fun. And hopefully it's provided some insight for everybody. Thanks, everybody, for listening to this episode of the podcast. We'll be back next week with yet another.
I'm your host, Dr. Drew Crawford. Join me next week as we go beyond measurements and image to build healthier lifestyles and elevate your well-being on the BMI Podcast. See you then.